went to. Anyway, good evening, everyone. I think I know many of you, but my name is Amy Skillman. I'm the director of the MA program in cultural sustainability at Goucher College. And I have the pleasure of welcoming you to the third session in our chatFEST series of online conversations with various sustainability activists. I'd like to begin by thanking Amy Millen and Cecilia Ottenweller, who have been my colleagues and co-conspirators in planning this series. We've had a blast over the last several months designing these conversations and putting, thinking about who to put with whom for interesting dialogues. And so we hope that you'll enjoy this one and that maybe you've even visited some of the other ones. The next one is our last one in this spring series. It's scheduled for June 14th. And the title is Communicating Significance: Can Art and Culture Influence Public Policy? All of the sessions begin at 6:30, so that one will too. And I'm going to put the link in the chat so that if you haven't yet registered for that one, I believe the registration is still open. So go ahead and register for that if you like. Some quick Zoom kinds of reminders. Closed captioning is available. If you click on the CC button at the bottom of your screen, you should get the text popping up. As you all know, we're recording this. For now, please keep your microphone on mute and put your setting on speaker view if you like, so that you can see who's speaking, most clearly. When we switch to open questions from everybody, we'll invite you to certainly turn on your microphone and be part of the audience and speak. So these events are designed as conversations. So our speakers will offer some opening remarks, and then we'll have a moderated dialogue. We called it chatFEST specifically so that you would feel encouraged to communicate with each other, especially using the chat function. So chat away if you like, and if you want, you can begin by saying something about who you are and why you're here or where you're coming from. And while you're doing that, I'm going to go ahead and get us started. So the concept of sustainability foregrounds social movements around the world. And we in the MAX program understand sustainability as, in some ways, as the ability of people and the natural world to coexist equitably on Earth over time. And yet the processes of climate change, war, globalization, gentrification, all conspire to threaten this ability to coexist. And there's resistance to sustainability goals that seems to have risen lately. So often seen as kind of a conspiracy for taking away freedoms or property rights. So communication is really critical if we are to move toward more sustainable ways of being on the planet. And this series, this chatFEST series, builds on ideas and conversations from our 2022 International Conference on communicating sustainability. And I'll grab that link to those recordings and put it in the chat in a minute. But we wanted to create conversations with artists, scholars, and community leaders that are exploring innovative and diverse ways to communicate, in particular, the value of sustainable practices. So tonight's theme is communicating connections between culture and nature. Clearly an important intersection in the long-term global sustainability goals. And through the speakers tonight, we'll be exploring projects that make those connections and the kinds of challenges faced in communicating their significance. Rob Forloney will be our moderator. He serves as the program officer for partnerships with Maryland Humanities and is on the faculty in the MA program in cultural sustainability, where he teaches our museum studies courses, but he also teaches a course on environment, culture, and community, and it's wearing that hat that he is moderating the conversation tonight. He has worked in the museum field for more than 20 years as an educator, an administrator, and a consultant, including places like the American Museum of Natural History, the South Street Seaport Museum, and the Chesapeake Bay Maritime Museum. Rob strives to ensure that communities have their voices heard and that they are empowered by the cultural institutions that attempt to share their stories. His goal is to enable all audiences to actively engage with objects, images, and exhibitions in order to acquire new knowledge and create personal meaning. Ellen McHale, one of our speakers tonight, has served as the CEO of New York Folklore since 1999, including her role as managing editor of Voices, which is the Journal of New York Folklore. Prior to 1999, Ellen worked as a public sector folklorist in several locations throughout New York State. Tonight, she's coming to us as the co-founder and board member of the Schoharie River Center, a not-for-profit organization dedicated to educational and cultural programming about the Schoharie Creek and the communities that make up the Schoharie River Valley, or Schoharie, I guess. Scary is what Ellen says they call it in that by local dialect. Formed in 1999, the Schoharie River Center is a membership organization that sponsors and operates 3 environmental study team programs. Ellen is a scholar and an activist with research interests that include responses to climate change and flooding caused by Hurricane Irene and Tropical Storm Lee, refugee and immigrant inclusion and adaptation, and the intersection of culture and the environment. And then our second speaker, Morgan Wittelsberger, is an eco-cultural researcher, a regenerative agrarian, and a community organizer based in Baltimore, Maryland. She works as a community garden liaison for this for Baltimore government's Be More Beautiful program, and is co-founder of Baltimore's local chapter of Extinction Rebellion. Morgan graduated with her BA in Interdisciplinary Studies from Naropa University in 2015, and just graduated from the Masters of Cultural Sustainability program last Thursday. Woohoo! She has traveled extensively, working on regenerative farms across the country and around the world, notably in India, Nepal, and Germany. Morgan is driven to work at the intersection of cultural and environmental sustainability, seeing culture as a resource to promote sustainability and resilience in the long term. So that's who's joining us tonight, and I will now turn it over to Rob to get us started. Thank you, everyone, for being here.
Great. Thank you, Amy. Really appreciate it. I'm honored to be here with many of you and my colleagues to share some of the work that they're currently undergoing. As Amy said, one of the things that we're going to be focusing primarily tonight is on the intersections, interdependencies, and relationships of environment, culture, and community. And as our world gets more complex, looking at the relationships between economics, social relationships, politics, with regards to all of these things. So the hope is that we're going to use some of the work that our presenters are doing as a catalyst, share some ideas and have an engaging conversation amongst ourselves, and then open it up to all of you to ask questions, but hopefully share some of the work that you're doing in a variety of different places around the world as well. As Amy mentioned, I've been involved with cultural institutions. I've done a lot of work on the Chesapeake Bay watershed with watermen, scientists, and tribal citizens. One of the things that's really difficult often is that we have very differing worldviews and perspectives of how we look at similar topics and issues. So one of the things that we want to talk about today is how we can communicate and work across those barriers for a common good and generate consensus about what we would like our communities to be. We're going to start off with Morgan Wittelsberger, and she's going to talk a little bit about the work that she's just completed for her capstone in Max, and talking a little bit more specifically about the work that she's been doing in regards to promoting cultural sustainability, really in other places around the world. Morgan, would you like to start us off?
Absolutely. Let me just share my screen. Okay, cool. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. So I'm going to be talking to you tonight about my thesis project on agro-ecocultural sustainability, intercultural land stewardship in Auroville, India. Okay. So you might be wondering what exactly Auroville is. So Auroville is an international intentional community located in the South Indian state of Tamil Nadu. If you don't know what an intentional community is, it's a group of people who live and work together cooperatively to create an environmental lifestyle, or an environment and lifestyle that reflect their shared core values. Auroville is the world's largest intentional community and is unique in its goal of creating a universal township where people from all countries are able to live, ideally, in progressive harmony beyond creeds, politics, and nationalities, with the common purpose of realizing human unity and diversity. I chose to carry out research in Auroville because of both its cultural diversity and environmental initiatives. The community's blend of intercultural social dynamics and land stewardship ethos provided a compelling case study of the interfaces between humans and nature, as well as nature and culture. With members from over 60 different nations, Auroville embodies a unique microcosm of humanity at large and can provide lessons on how we can attempt to collectively create a more equitable, peaceful, and culturally diverse society. Auroville also maintains a number of unique cutting-edge environmental initiatives with over 200,000, or sorry, I wish 200,000, 2,000 acres devoted to reforestation and 1,200 acres devoted to ecological agriculture. So my research explores the concept of agro-ecocultural sustainability, which I define as the act of sustaining dynamic ecosystems and human cultures symbiotically through regenerative agricultural stewardship practices. The main questions that guided my capstone were, how do intercultural influences and dynamics shape land stewardship models within Auroville? How do culturally diverse agriculture and reforestation practices contribute to both the sustainability and regeneration of Auroville's ecosystem and the development of a sense of community among its members? And how does intercultural land stewardship contribute to the creation of ecocultural civilizations at large? I explored these questions through an ethnographic lens that elevates the lived experiences of land stewardship embodied by my research participants. So for this project, I traveled to Auroville and lived there for 6 months. During this time, I volunteered on a number of farms and reforestation projects. My data was gathered primarily through participant observation research, which I conducted by taking part in the daily life of Auroville and experiencing firsthand the ecological work the community was engaged with. I kept detailed field notes on my day-to-day observations and experiences and conducted 20 interviews with a variety of land stewards and from the community, which represent a diversity of cultural, age, class, and gender identities. So for the purpose of my project, I define land stewardship as the relational tending of a piece of land in a manner that integrates the intersecting demands of local, ecological, cultural, social, and economic elements. Stewardship is deeply relational work in that it requires the steward to cultivate a personally meaningful connection with the land, as well as to the context of the bioregional community the land is embedded within. Stewardship is based on a set of values and ideas shaped directly by one's own interpersonal relationship with the earth. A distinctive culture of land stewardship has evolved in the Auroville community over the past half-century. All of Auroville's land is collectively owned, so residents can only be stewards, not owners of the land. Within the land stewardship projects I worked with in Auroville, I identified 4 main categories of stewardship. These are organic farming, permaculture, chameleon, and reforestation stewardship. Organic farms in Auroville embody a vast array of ecologically oriented stewardship techniques. Their goals range from feeding the Auroville community to sustaining endangered vegetable cultivars. The unifying philosophy of these organic farming projects was their striving towards self-sufficiency. The visions they shared for the future sustainable development of Auroville included the collective integration of socially, culturally, and spiritually egalitarian values. Permaculture, short for permanent agriculture, is an intercultural, mutually regenerative agricultural system that uses techniques of biomimicry and whole systems thinking to grow food in collaboration with nature. Auroville's permaculture farms all used integrative food forest methodologies to grow indigenous edible and medicinal plants in harmony with nature. Auroville's permaculture stewards believe that everyone in the community should play some kind of role in the production of the food they eat, consuming mainly local and wild forage foods. The Tamil-run stewardship projects I worked with focused on growing bioregionally adapted cultivars of local edible, medicinal, and other utilitarian plant species. The Tamilian stewards I interviewed all had unique humanitarian goals for their projects. Some wanted to help educate children, empower local women, or promote the revitalization of local cultural traditions. All of these stewards connected their traditional Vedic and Dravidian spiritual beliefs with their philosophy of land stewardship, citing Tamil cultural customs which integrate reverence and gratitude for the earth into everyday life. Reforestation efforts in Auroville have been one of the most successful ventures of the community. Aurovillians have been responsible for reforesting thousands of acres with 2 million trees of over 1,000 different local species varieties over the past 55 years. Much of their work has been based on grassroots trial and error methods, which have evolved over time into a variety of complex restoration methodologies. The mindsets of the stewards were ecocentric, and many struggled with conflicts currently playing out in the community around a more anthropocentric orientation towards the city's development, which threatened to destroy some reforested areas. So key themes that emerged to me through the analysis of my research fell into the categories of intercultural stewardship, eco-spiritual stewardship, and sustainable development. Each of these topics embodies consequential aspects of the dynamics manifest within land stewardship in Auroville. Auroville is a complex tapestry of interwoven cultural realities. The community's diversity of identities, ideologies, customs, and values contribute to its goals of human unity. Diversity in cultures, practices, and knowledge are a source of wealth within the social fabric of the community. In Auroville, intercultural land stewardship requires cultural compromise in the areas of food production and animal husbandry. Food consumption within Auroville is a point of intercultural negotiation. Many of the crops which people prefer to consume come from ingredients that are not able to be grown within the local bioregion. Although the local Tamil people are deeply involved and integral to the Auroville community, there remains vast room for improvement in cultural relations. The Auroville community could do more to ensure that Tamilians are offered the same opportunities for leadership positions that foreign Aurovillians have. Some Tamilians feel that they are outsiders on their own ancestral land when in the Auroville community. Others shared with me that they have experienced a lack of access to the same opportunities for stewardship that foreigners have and are being forced to work in more menial labor positions. Definitions of sustainability within Auroville vary. Many land stewards see sustainability as creating regenerative land stewardship systems with no external inputs. This drive towards self-sufficiency is representative of an attraction to ways of living that are more closely aligned with traditional land-based sustainable practices. Reinstating some of Auroville's cooperative infrastructure and sharing resources is seen by some stewards as another path towards social and ecological sustainability. Increasing the implementation of small-scale economic systems modeled after natural methods of exchange, such as the gift economy or trade and barter system, was proposed by some stewards as a means by which to bring Auroville closer to meeting its goals of self-sustainability in a moneyless economy. Ecocentric versus anthropocentric development poses a prominent contemporary divide in ideology around Auroville's sustainable development. Land stewards expressed that there were opposing views of development in the community, some of which were driven by capitalism, anthropocentrism, and spiritual idealism, while others centered on ecological regeneration. The future of sustainable land stewardship in Auroville is deeply contested. Conflicts around land grabs and encroachments are a prevalent challenge to sustainable development within the community. Though the stated goal of Auroville is to forge a path towards human unity, the contemporary conflicts that are playing out are creating profound divisions and disharmonies on social, ecological, economic, and political levels. The stark contrast between how Auroville idyllically presents itself to the world and the community dynamics that are playing out on the ground are quite striking. So intersecting intercultural ideas of human unity and ecological reciprocity form the idealized ideological basis of many land stewardship projects in Auroville. Stewards from a variety of different backgrounds are, in some situations, able to work together with the community to implement regenerative earth-based practices, which are both healing for the land as well as for the individuals engaged in those stewardship practices. The Aurovillian land stewards I spoke with believe that the spiritual and ecological evolution of the community are not mutually exclusive processes. Definitions of sustainability are also negotiated through a spiritual lens. Spiritual beliefs are not monolithic and encompass a diverse variety of perspectives. The idea of seva, or selfless service to the earth, was a common theme among Aurovillian land stewards. Many stewards came to the community to put their energy towards building an alternative regenerative society rather than fighting to change dominant destructive societal systems. A paradigm shift away from compartmentalizing nature and towards an expanded concentric view of the natural world is foundational to many of these conceptualizations. Auroville seeks to catalyze self-realization by means of day-to-day life. Tending to the earth through farming and gardening is seen as a path towards cultivating the best version of themselves. This perspective is preceded by an expanded view of the ecological self, which sees the flourishing of humans and their embedded ecologies as interconnected. So in conclusion, intercultural influences and dynamics shape land stewardship models in Auroville through a complex interplay of nuanced beliefs, values, agendas, ideas, and perspectives. These factors are informed by residents' positionalities and histories within the community. Culturally diverse agriculture and reforestation practices have contributed to the regeneration of Auroville's ecosystem through a variety of methodologies drawn from innumerable traditions around the world. The diversity of stewardship techniques and microclimatic ecosystems which have evolved as a result of these practices are representative of the manifold knowledge these stewards embody. A sense of community has been developed around these practices by bringing people from numerous different countries, creeds, classes, and cultures together with the common purpose of working towards stewarding the earth in a compassionate and sustainable way. Though there are many conflicts and divisions within the community, Auroville remains a unique project in the world, deserving praise for all of the strides it has made towards the development of a society aiming at human unity. My hope is that my research is useful to the field of cultural sustainability and that it provides insights into the dynamics of ecocultural resilience. Auroville embodies an example of how the communal management of collectively owned natural resources aids in the cultivation of a deeper sense of responsibility to and greater stewardship of the land. The case studies in which I elevate the voices and stories of Auroville stewards highlight the need for the incorporation of both social and natural knowledge systems to guide sustainable community development. They also underscore the need for the guidance of intercultural perspectives and traditions in the formation of a truly resilient regenerative stewardship model. And that is it. That is a quick, well, not so quick, I guess I maybe went over my time, but synopsis. I wrote a 230-page paper about this. So if you're interested in learning more, please let me know. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. That was really wonderful. Again, I think we're going to have a lot more conversations about a number of different things. Specifically, I think this idea of restoration and reciprocal healing, in addition to that, the relationship of intentionality of forming a community based on a different value system, and also the kind of difference in terms of what was happening on the ground versus the way that people were presenting themselves. These are all things I think that are important for us to look into more deeply. The other thing I want to talk about is the kind of connections between the work that you're doing and what Ellen's doing at the Schoharie River Center as well. Ellen, would you like to take us through some of the work that you're doing in New York?
Sure. So
I'm happy to share your slides. Just let me know when you want me to.
Yes, you could. I guess you could start anytime.
Great.
So thanks everyone for being here. This is a New York centric presentation. I am a native New Yorker, I guess one would say, and not that I've lived throughout the entire state, but I've lived through much of central New York and northern New York. So certainly there's a certain segment of the state that I know and love. So New York State has over 70,000 miles of rivers and streams and more than 7,600 freshwater ponds, lakes, and reservoirs. So when I think about New York, I think about water. Watersheds are, I think, a really defining principle of the state and how it's operates sort of regionally. So the next slide shows where I live. I live in the Schoharie watershed. It's bordered on the north by the Mohawk River, Erie Canal, Barge Canal. I live in Montgomery County at the northern part, but you can see the Schoharie watershed goes, it actually flows from south to north. So it feels a little counterproductive, but it begins in the Catskill Mountains in Greene County and it flows north to the Mohawk River. You can keep going, Rob. Here's another picture of my neighborhood. This is the Schoharie Creek right near my home. So in 1999, the Schoharie River Center was founded by myself, my husband, John McKeeby, and a small group of local folks. And we formed it with a joint environmental and cultural mission, which was to draw attention to the watershed, the Schoharie watershed predominantly, but we also are part of the Mohawk watershed and by extension, the Hudson River watershed. But to draw attention to the watersheds and also the cultural traditions that are found there. So you can go to the next one, Rob. So the intention actually of starting the Schoharie River Center was to save this building. Is one of those sort of knee-jerk reactions at an evening over the dinner table when we heard that the building was the last sort of patriarch of the church, which was a Methodist Episcopal church built in 1856. Had passed away and had only had 8 members, and there was rumors about this little hamlet where I live of burning it down or selling it and moving it away. So there was a conversation over the dinner table that went sort of like, oh, what a shame, somebody should do something. And then we realized that nobody would do it. So my husband and I formed a nonprofit and bought the building with a group of other folks in the town. Since this was the Schoharie River Center, the footprint of the building is pretty much the footprint of the land with a little tiny bit of parking on the side there that you can see. But for the most part, that was the Schoharie River Center, which was that way for probably about 10 years. But since its founding in 1999, the building has grown from this one building on very little land to include 4 other structures. We now have this original church building, which is actually in the process of constructing now extension on the back with a bathroom facility, a heating facility, and we'll have a handicapped accessible ramp. It's become a performance venue. It has beautiful acoustics. We also have a blacksmith shop, a maple sap house, an outdoor classroom, the David Remling Science Center, and a 20-acre nature preserve. So that's how the place has grown. And Rob, if you, these are some of the programs that we do at the Schoharie River Center. So that you can see first, you can go through them maybe sort of just the next 5 in sort of sequence. So we try to really think about how does our natural environment fit with the cultural traditions that are in the community. So we have such things as Fishing Heritage Days. We did a Writing the Watershed festival twice, where we really looked at environmental humanities. How are people using and writing about the watershed? And it turns out there was some wonderful local poets from the 1920s who wrote about this region. Fred Lape was one. You can get his book. It's probably not on sale anymore, but it was called A Farm to Village Boyhood, which is all about the change of the place in the 1920s going into World War II. So this was one of our programs. This is our most recent program. We did a call for films across the globe and got 3,000 submissions to the Mayfly Film Festival, and we have been touring this around. They're all short films. If any of you are filmmakers and make films about the environment and the cultural aspects of it, either piece of it, we'd love to have submissions. We're working on the second film festival now, but it's been traveling around the region. I'm not sure what else. Oh, we also do a lot of folk arts programming because I'm a folklorist by training. So this is a foraged dye workshop with Cece Kachik, the woman in the apron, a local sheep farmer, textile and wool enthusiast, and who also does natural dye. So we do a lot of folk arts programming at the River Center. Again, taking it from the environment that's here and finding out who's in our neighborhood and what kinds of cultural traditions can we support. You can go to the next one. Timber framing has become a big part of what we do, and that's how we actually have built many of our buildings. The SAP house, the outdoor classroom, and the blacksmith shop were all timber framed buildings that were done in a workshop. So sort of the Tom Sawyer method of building buildings. But we work with master timber framers who are doing the building styles of that region. The Dutch barn has a strong hold on the region, and so that building style is continued into the present. The church structure that I showed at the beginning is a timber frame structure, and we're right now building an extension on it that's also timber framed. It's been a year-long process of Thursday nights, people coming to build, to shape beams, and we're just beginning to erect it now. So timber framing is, again, part of the landscape where we are and part of the folk arts programming that we do. The other big signature program of the Schoharie River Center is the Environmental Study Team, and it's a youth stewardship program. It involves youth in 5 communities at this point, and they meet weekly and in different configurations. But they study the environmental science of the region. They learn biology, they learn macrovertebrate identification, they do chemistry, water chemistries, and because we have a cultural mission, they also learn how to do ethnography and ethnographic field methods. So so we try to mix the science and the environment, and we think of citizen scientists, we also think of citizen folklorists. So this is actually after the flood of Irene, which happened in 2011. We were planting riparian zones all up and down the Schoharie Creek to try to reforest the watershed after the flood came through. You can go to the next one. And this is, again, macroinvertebrate identification. So we work with teens from the ages of 12 till 19, and often they stay through those years. So they often begin as middle school students, and they stay until they graduate. Many go on to science and technology fields. Many become environmental engineers. Some also become folklorists and filmmakers. So again, we see the influences happening. But with a folklorist bent, we do a lot of interviewing about the environment. We visit Native communities that are in our region and talk about the Native perspective on the land. So again, we're teaching students how to also be ethnographers. So you can go maybe back. We'll wait on that last slide. So other programming initiatives have been that we worked with the Smithsonian's Museum on Main Street Waterways exhibition. That I did actually as the executive director of New York Folklore, but we also involved the Schoharie River Center and their youth program in 2019 and 2020, right before the pandemic. We did provided folk arts programming that went along the exhibition that traveled through 6 sites in the state. And we also worked with the Schoharie River Center youth to create videos through the Stories Yes program of this museum on Main Street. And youth created videos on their own topics that they chose, spirituality and water, the history of the Erie Canal in Fort Plain, New York, and Nurdles and the Calico Connection, which was an expose documentary on plastics pollution in Mayfield, New York. So the students chose what they wanted to film, and we worked with them around interviewing techniques and filmmaking techniques. And because of that, actually, the Schoharie River Center now has a media educator on their staff. And that's been a really important role that has been filled, and that's why we do the Mayfly Film Festival also. Other projects, again, the New York Folklore has done is in 2015, I began to collect narratives of the people impacted by flooding in the Mohawk and Schoharie watersheds caused by Hurricane Irene and Tropical Storm Lee in 2011, along with Lily and Spina Kaza of Schoharie Area Long-Term Recovery, which was a human services recovery organization that formed after the flood. Lillian and I trained volunteers and collected over 65 oral history narratives about the flooding from Prattsville all the way to Schenectady. And then New York Folklore and Schoharie Area Long-Term Recovery curated and presented 2 exhibitions in 2021 for the 10-year anniversary of Irene, which those exhibitions were localized to Schoharie and Schenectady counties. So now you can, Rob, you can go to the final slide. So this is finally the current project of New York Folklore. Again, it's a group project. The Schoharie River Center is involved, as is 3 of my folklore colleagues in the state, and a couple other environmental organizations. We have received through the Gateway project of the Appalachian Regional Commission and the NEA, and with a seed grant from the Conservation Fund, we're beginning to work with Seneca artist Bill Krause to create and develop a place-making marking program for natural sites on the Allegheny River that hold importance for the Seneca Nation. And so we're trying to think about not really tourism as much as place marking for communities with using the watershed as an organizing principle, and to really think about indigenous cultural landscapes. What's important on in this case, the Allegheny River in the southern tier, what is important to the Seneca Nation. And Bill, as an artist, is creating pictorial descriptions of those places. And we hope to have QR codes and have some narratives that have been developed alongside it. And again, this is in New York southern tier in what is considered the Northern Appalachian region. So in conclusion, I'll just say some of my concerns and my work through the Schoharie River Center, but also through New York Folklore, is really that concern for place and the interplay of natural and cultural assets. With the environmental study team, I'm always interested and concerned with how the idea of the citizen scientist, unengaged citizen concerned with the environment, can be augmented to include the idea of a citizen folklorist within a region. Certainly that's what we've been doing with youth, giving them those documentation skills. And then by doing so, you can really look at changes due to climate change. You can look at loss of agricultural land, which is a problem where I live. And you could also really look at and highlight the importance of collecting traditional ecological knowledge. And then finally, how do you recognize, or how do you encourage sustainable stewardship within a region? And I have been thinking a lot about sort of reciprocal relationships between humans and the natural world. And I've been drawing on some of the sociology sources that talk about neighborliness. I've been finding work about neighborliness and how that can be used as a framing mechanism to think about stewardship. You're neighborly to your neighbors, but you're also neighborly to the environment that you live in and interact with on a daily basis. So I will leave it there.
Thank you very much, Ellen. I greatly appreciate your sharing with us. So there's a tremendous amount to unpack, both in terms of the projects that you're undertaking and also what we can do to promote cultural sustainability with regards to the work that's happening in our communities. I can particularly tell you I'm interested in the Museum on Main Street because we here in Maryland recently had waterways as well. So I oversee the Museum on Main Street program as part of Maryland Humanities. And one of the things that's always interesting to me is that this is a traveling exhibit that's designed from the Smithsonian with a national lens, but each particular community creates their own companion exhibition and programming around it. And it's always stunning to me how the organizations that serve as host sites and partners take their own spin, look at the values, think about the sense of place of their own particular community, and talk about how they can promote stewardship in that way. So what I'd love to hear from you both first is this idea of sense of place and identity formation, how important you think it is with regards for promoting the sense of stewardship and inspiring people to change their behavior or really taking accountability for what's happening on the grounds itself. Do you think it's really necessary for people to identify in a personal way to the sense of space where their particular community is?
If I can start, I definitely do. With that Museum on Main Street, we partnered with the Museum Association, and they asked us to provide that sort of folk arts lens for the 6 museums that we worked with. And so we worked very hard to try to work with them about what their local environment was. But I think also with kids, one of the students at the environmental study team, I don't know if she coined this term, but I think she used it really well. But when they were doing the plastics pollution film, she talked about a disrupted sense of place, that she had this sense of place, and because of the environmental degradation of the landscape, she felt that her sense of place had been corrupted. And I think that just that connectedness to land is something that my opinion is that I think it's very important to feel that connection. If you don't feel that connection, I think whether it's through trauma like a flood, or whether it's through environmental degradation, or whether it's because you haven't spent time enough in a place to understand it and to pull it in. I think that I think that place is important.
Absolutely agree. And a word that popped into my head while you were talking is like solastalgia, this longing that I think a lot of us have for a place that has been destroyed, a home that's been destroyed. And so I think, creating a communal cultural sense of self in a world that's rapidly disintegrating, around us is a really challenging thing when like these cultural markers and these environments which have like given birth to culture are being destroyed. Like how do we claim a sense of place in that? And I feel like in my activism, I've seen that like community is formed around trauma, and whether that's healthy or unhealthy, we have trauma bonding, which is not healthy, but like going through, a struggle together is, I think, like a really healthy way to build community and to build a sense of purpose and place. Like I think, you know, about a lot of like the younger generation who just are feeling extremely like alienated from their ecosystems and from each other. And it's like having this like shared struggle that's just, you know, not just local, but also like international towards a kind of new, you know, way of interacting with the earth that's not purely destructive and extractive is really powerful. And yeah, I think like creative placemaking is such a powerful tool. I mean, like, yeah, like, I mean, a lot of the work that you're doing, Ellen, is really profound. And in my experience in Baltimore, like creative placemaking through like urban gardens has been a way that people who didn't see themselves like in the environment, like reflected, are able to like see themselves and their importance and their value and the value of their community and their culture. And just having like a physical location where that's reflected is so powerful. You know, even just like a mural going up can be like a reflection of the people who have made the life that, like, you know, certain people like find, you know, really valuable. Like their life is like reflected in that. So yeah, I think that's really, it's such a powerful thing to be connecting our local ecosystems and our built environments as a reflection of ourselves and our communities.
You know, it's interesting because I also see in situations where people have an incredibly strong sense of identity and connection to place, there can be direct conflicts in terms of different worldviews of how to manage those natural and cultural resources. So, for example, the work that we do here on the Chesapeake Bay is really important with regards to the economic, social, political relations across the area. But you have watermen who've been here for generations who perceive their conservation efforts and what they do on the oyster reef in a very different way than the way the scientists who are growing oyster spat and promoting aquaculture or sanctuaries come into perspective. So they're both working towards the same goal of having long-term sustainable oyster fisheries, but they're going about it in a different perspective. So both of the spaces that you're talking about, there seems to be potential for direct conflict with people who have the same intention, but might have different ways of going about doing this work. Have you found ways that were successful of communicating across those barriers or helping to generate consensus when people have disparate views of what they think should take place with regards to conservation?
I don't know if I have any specific examples. I think ethnography helps. I think in sort of deep listening and doing interviewing and that really helps frame, I think, how people feel about places, and you can find that commonality, you can find that common strain maybe, and mediate it if people are coming from different places. I was wondering, as Morgan was speaking and as you were just saying, I could see where that would be a real strain in the community that you were working with in Auroville, between the Tamil and the folks that were part of Auroville. I don't know if you found that disconnect or that disjuncture there.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that was a question that C brought up in the chat as well, is that kind of difference between people who are externally coming in with an intentional purpose versus the Tamil people who might have been there before.
Absolutely. Well, and that was something that I felt was very remarkable that I found in the community, was that, you know, there's this like kind of Western vision of sustainability and of, you know, spiritual evolution, have you, and kind of like the New Age community, which Auroville is embedded within, that really was imposed upon the, you know, native Tamil communities there, that wasn't in alignment with the cultural, you know, ecosystem that was there. So it was like very colonial in a lot of ways. And, you know, Tamil Nadu has an extremely rich history of sustainability and resiliency. And, you know, I think in my experience, you know, with the stewards I interviewed, like there isn't an integration of that in Auroville, which I found very surprising because, you know, why wouldn't you want to like work with what's already there? Like, why would you come and like kind of impose your own vision without accepting or without exploring the resources that have already, you know, arisen communally? So yeah, I found that there was a disconnect, and also just, you know, the differing visions of sustainability are really, really vast. I mean, I think everywhere in the world, and I encountered that in Auroville, where, you know, a lot of people just wanted to be able to, you know, get by in a system that had been oppressive for so long. You know, this community of Auroville was started like the year after French colonialism ended, you know, we say, in South India. So there was this kind of, you know, this wanting to just live like a free and abundant lifestyle. I think that was, you know, preceding colonialism in this area. But, you know, the Auroville, even though it claimed to be in opposition to the bureaucracy and the oppressions of like the external world, really created a lot of parallels to these oppressions, because there wasn't like a robust kind of like deconstruction of these dynamics in the community. And that's one thing I wrote about at the end of my paper, was that, you know, cultural mediation is a huge thing that can be a solution to this, decolonial reconciliation, deep listening, dialogue, consensus. Like, yeah, these things like seem like they should form the basis of intentional communities. And like, that's the thing that I found with Auroville, is that they presented themselves as, you know, working through these processes, but really on the ground, there was a very disenfranchised group within the Tamil population there.
This is Cecilia. I love both of your presentations. Thank you so much. Kind of continuing this conversation, I want to kind of let y'all know that when we did our conference last year at Max for the international conference, we had a presentation by Tim Frandy, who actually made the argument of it should not be sustainability, it should be sustainabilities. That there are multiple sustainabilities with different groups who live in different ecosystems. So there's each one of those are their own relationship. And it sounds like in your case, Morgan, that there was a sustainability that the Tamil people had within their own environment and their own niche, as well as their own history as far as colonialization. And then you have another group coming in that has a different concept of sustainability that's more of a hegemonic definition. So does that make sense? But if you, yeah, I really suggest anybody to go to that link that Skillman put in the chat and go find that presentation by Tim Frandy. It is jaw-dropping.
Yeah, there's so many implications in regards to power and governance with regards to this. The same thing in terms of the Chesapeake Bay and the relationships of who has the control to regulate the natural resource, and what happens when we monetize or create a valuation of the landscape or the waterscapes in those respects, because it becomes really difficult when you have a situation where people have different perspectives. And that idea of multiple sustainabilities, multiple communities is really key. And part of the problem, I think, with these issues of social justice is that there's a disconnected asymmetry in terms of who has the power and who's able to impose their control over how things are managed. And it's really interesting thinking about watersheds, Ellen, in regards to the Chesapeake Bay, where you even have the bay itself, and the way that's dealt with in Virginia is different than Maryland, with this arbitrary made up barrier. And you've got Smith Island on one side and Tangier on the other side, or thinking the fact that goes all the way into New York and Pennsylvania, and everyone has a different perspective of how to manage that watershed.
Mm-hmm.
It's very problematic when you're trying to be inclusive, but everyone has a different idea of what the correct sense of sustainability is and how they're even identifying or defining sustainability. Have you found that that's been problematic in terms of dealing with governance issues with organizations who are trying to work collaboratively across nonprofits and with government agencies or states?
Definitely. I mean, there's the not to name names, but there's the Department of Environmental Conservation, which is a state agency, and certainly they have a different worldview about the watershed than some of the local advocacy and activist groups. I know that in the work that we've been doing this year in the Southern Tier, the whole idea of displacement really came to a fore. And we started looking at displacement of Native peoples, the Kinzua Dam in Pennsylvania, for example, and the Allegheny really displaced the Seneca Nation. But then you then you look at other forms of displacement. We began to Ginny Shear in the Catskills. She has an organization called Catskills Folk Connection, and she talks really cogently about displacement through the making of the New York City water supply. And so real loss of that itself is trauma on the land, you know, loss of real communities as homes were burned and people were displaced so that the water supplies could be made. And it happened actually up here in the northern part of New York where I live, on the Mohawk, because of the trying to control flooding on the Erie Canal and the Barge Canal, so, and the Mohawk River. So displacement and who sort of decides what's the greater good, like working for the greater good, who makes those decisions as what is the greater good and who does it benefit? I think is a question that we've been struggling with this year with this Appalachian Regional Commission project that we're doing.
I really want to open things up to the larger group here as well. But one thing I want to point out or ask you about specifically is the role that education plays, because it seems like both of the projects or multiple projects that you talked about were really tied to sponsoring and providing for transmission of knowledge and cultural sustainability from generation to generation, but also talking about providing a sense of place and pride within the community itself. The National Park Service here has been working with indigenous cultural landscapes through tributaries in particular, looking at particular rivers with tribal citizens. And one of the things that they've been doing with the Rappahannock people is a program called Return to the River, where tribal youth are learning about their connection to the waterways, their relationship to the landscape itself. And through the indigenous cultural landscape idea, the whole concept is breaking down the discrimination between natural resource and cultural resource, and really looking at the indigenous worldview of those things being connected together and using the tributary or the watershed as a way of getting that together. So what role do you see education playing in the work that you've done in terms of communicating the importance of this work and values to the next generation?
I think it's huge. Schenectady has an environmental study team, for example, and it's an urban environment. The waters are underground. I mean, they were all covered over. So it's really difficult to get kids to connect, even though the Mohawk River is right there. You can't really get to it. And when you do get to it, there's it's not very clean. And so it's really difficult to work with urban youth. And so there's an environmental justice issue that you don't have access to the water. And when you do have access, it's not easy access, I guess I just want to say. I think with kids who are growing up and the ones that are involved in our environmental study teams that are more rural, they have a much easier connection to place. And I think it's very important for kids to have a grounding in where they live, and both environmentally, but also culturally. And I think that so too often we don't recognize the value of the cultural communities that we live in and about. And there's a lot in upstate New York anyway, in northern New York, there's a lot of looking outward and saying, oh, they have that and I don't have it. And I think that attitude, I try really hard to dispel that feeling, because I think kids need to feel a sense of worth in who they are and where they come from. One thing we would like to do with this Southern Tier project is do an exchange program with for example, with the Seneca Nation youth and the Environmental Study Team youth, and have a direct exchange. We'll go to the nation and the nation will come to us. I think that would be really fun to share perspectives on water, because we are all living in a watershed someplace.
That's beautiful, Ellen. I'll just add a little bit. Since my experience with educating youth has come from my work with urban gardens, I'll just speak to that. But yeah, I found that, it's absolutely imperative because youth are the ones who will find new and more adaptive ways of dealing with the shifting conditions of our increasingly destabilizing world. And yeah, I think, connecting kids with nature is a huge part of cultural resiliency. In my experience through growing food, kids are put in touch with cycles of the earth and can tactically experience their connection to this living planet. When youth are educated on how to heal ecosystems, they also gain resources on how to heal themselves. And, these processes of reconnecting young people with nature helps to cultivate values which underline the creation of a culture of sustainability. One thing I was listening to yesterday on a podcast was, about how, our capitalist society will, systematically disconnects us from the earth by means of making us into just, workers and seeing ourselves like as only like our productivity. And I think that creating ways that we can experience the ecosystem around us and identify with that is going to ultimately bring us into a better relationship with the earth as a whole and with ourselves, where we're not seeing ourselves as just a cog in this machine that's headed towards extinction. We can empower ourselves to be active parts of our community and to feel like a part of the earth, and to not just be constantly in this disconnected, isolated mindset that I think society puts us in, at least in this country.
Great. And I know a number of people on the call are working in a variety of different ways in other communities around the world, in the country as well, in these respects. Sue, you talked a little bit about the work that you are doing at the Center for Folklife Studies in Ohio. Could you share a little bit more about that? Would you be willing to share with us? And then Rory has his hand raised as well.
Sure, just along the lines of this conversation in terms of the next generation and collaborative work, which both of you guys have talked about, which I think is so important. I worked with a couple other folklorists and a whole series of community partners to do a traveling exhibit that was focused on one county in Ohio, Scioto County. And a lot of what I think made it successful was that the content of the exhibit came from both field work by folklore students, but also community programming, where the community was invited to something I learned at Max, actually, to participate in a program where people went around, and I can't remember what it's called. It's a workshop kind of format. Where you, sorry, I was in traffic for a long time today, where you have topics and people go around from table to table and have a discussion.
World Cafe.
World Cafe, thank you, Amy. So we did a World Cafe, and I think it really made a difference in not just creating an exhibit, but actually literally asking community folks what they thought were the important things to focus on. And certainly all of the themes that both of our speakers have talked about today, sustainability and climate change and local environment, all came up as really important topics. And then we worked with local educators, and they each developed and then tested during the pandemic. So, but lesson plans that I've put in the chat. So those might be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. One of the things we talked about when we were preparing for this presentation was the idea of all these different types of practitioners involved with this work: citizen scientists, citizen folklorists, educators, community leaders, advocates. It really takes a wide variety of different types of stakeholders being involved in this work. Roy, do you have something you want to share?
Yeah, I just well, first of all, I want to commend you guys and see, you know, these really interesting links and resonances between Auroville and upstate New York. I was sort of directing this at Morgan and also Cecilia, and this, you know, the questions around colonial perspective. And you know, I think it's really interesting that there is this kind of split in that community. And I'm thinking, Morgan, that you probably thought a lot about this and had some conversations with people about this. Are there ways to, you know, what does your intuition, your insight, your wisdom tell you about how these different projects, you know, can be reconciled, or can they be?
I believe it's possible. There's this kind of complexity and added complexity in the Auroville community with the Indian government recently instated a secretary who's pretty much more or less like undemocratically taken over a lot of like the decision making in the community right now. And is not reflective even of, I think, like the majority of like the Indians' perspective in the community, and especially like the Tamil perspectives, because there's this huge divide between North and South India politically. And there's all kinds of conspiracies about why, you know, the federal government is taking more of an initiative in the community now. But I think that, you know, on a microcosmic level in the community, centering the voices of Tamil people in the community, I think is huge. I think that was like one thing I experienced in my work with the farm group, which is like a group of like stewards who like farm and mostly, yeah, it was like farm and garden stewards who there was just like so much conflict, like deep conflict in the group between like the Tamil populations and like, you know, people from other countries. And so I think cultural mediation is going to be like a big thing, and that should be facilitated, I think, by paid Tamil mediators who can like offer a deeper perspective of like why there's such like fundamental issues of like difference. And yeah, I mean, I think that there, unfortunately, in a lot of spiritual communities, in my experience, that are started by European or American, you know, mostly white people, is that there's not this like deeper dialogue. Like there's this kind of like idealization of like, okay, human unity, you know, and ecological sustainability, but like that kind of doesn't include like a deeper deconstruction of like white supremacy and all of the dynamics of colonialism that have played out, and like, you know, how people aren't doing like that personal work, like people are doing like spiritual work, but it's not inclusive of these conversations. So I think like, you know, within the education system in Auroville, because they have their whole own schooling system, like creating dialogues around like critical race theory or like specifically the history of colonialism, like in the Bayer region, would be really helpful to just give people kind of a foundation for this kind of thing, because people would just like look at me like I had four eyes, like when I would talk about, you know, the importance of like these like decolonial, you know, conversations. They'd be like, well, we're working towards human unity, like isn't that inclusive? And I'm like, you know, not if you're like ignoring the people who are indigenous to this area and like not integrating their input, you know, because you're saying that they have personal issues, you know, like just like generalizing Tamil people. So yeah, I think yeah, education is key, but yeah, cultural shifts I think will have to come from that.
Just to sort of you know, extend on that a little bit. You know, I think maybe there might be two things that would be helpful in general. One would be finding the research and exploring the long history of sustainable practices in Tamil, and, you know, sort of pointing out that these people are not dummies, and the way that they're stewarding is not, you know, only you know, it's not sort of less than, in fact, it might be more appropriate to this land. And and helping to, so I mean, that's one of the problems of colonialism, is the kind of denial of the value, coherence, and effectiveness of cultural practices that are part of people's lives in settled areas. The other thing is a more general kind of comment, and this relates to both Ellen and you, that I think that this goes back to Claude Lévi-Strauss, the great French anthropologist, who sort of said that a lot of the creations of culture, especially among isolated peoples, are about kind of making distinctions between nature and culture. What is human, what is not human. We do that. We have there are ideas of what nature is, and they're not monolithic in European Western culture, but they are there. And I think the potential of things like ecological restoration is in sounding a note through practice, through symbolic forms, to change that. So I agree with you, it's education, but it's also education in this kind of embodied way. What would that look like? And then I think also in terms of the power of forms of culture that have been studied as folklore and others, that these are these bridging genres. They're genres that can connect people and hopefully undermine the essentializing, reification, and caricaturing of others across lines of difference. So, I mean, there is another kind of way, and I'm saying that with you in mind, Ellen, because it sounds like that's something that you've been doing. It's like, how are we going to change people? How are people's mindsets going to be changed? How is a culture of sustainability going to, take root in places? It's not through, scolding people, and it's not through people wanting to change other people. It's through the creation of a culture. And what is the thing that creates the culture that is a meaningful way for people to sustain their communities and one another? So those are just my thoughts on this, but so fascinating and so great and so well presented, both of y'all.
Yeah, well, one of the biggest problems with communication is this whole concept of we privilege certain types of information and how it's built into the system itself. So we have these conversations in the environment, culture, and community class with environmental studies students who have a naturalistic perspective where it's all about data. The more information you have, it's just a matter of giving more material or telling people in a certain way, and you're going to convince them with the data rather than storytelling or narrative or empathy. So we create this system in a way that creates a situation where we're privileging those types of information that's very paternalistic, that's tied to that government and power issue. And whether you're looking at the kind of Indian government and the Tamil culture, or you're looking at watermen and scientists, it's a discrepancy between local knowledge and different ways of knowing and privileging data and quantitative material that people can pull together. I'm sorry, I interrupted someone. I'm not sure who it was.
I think it was Cecilia. She had her virtual hand up.
Oh, gotcha.
I'm sorry about that.
Go ahead.
Just the discussion with all of this, what Rory said is just so exciting, and what you just said, Rob, my God, the privileging of data, and that is it's almost like describes the whole Western epistemology is a privileging of data. But one of the things that kind of came up to my mind is just how effective in the chatFEST we had 2 weeks ago about the creative ways, through theater, through playback theater, through the comic books, through the urban planning, that you can get people to connect with the community that's there. It would be just, so many different creative third ways of going about it. I think it's so many opportunities there.
Are there other questions that people have for Ellen or Morgan, or experiences or stories that you'd like to share about your own work? Sandra?
Yeah, thank you. I think this has been a great way to spend the evening and great follow-up to the session that we had last year. And so thank you for that. Morgan, I did have a question because my heart seized when you said something about city development in the city around Auroville. And so I was wondering, because, you know, money talks, and I was wondering if you think there'll be an opportunity for Auroville and the Tamil community to come together in the event, the development around the city. And I don't know what it's to be, but I assume that it's one of the governments, local or national, that would be, or maybe it's a business entity, would be in control of that. But do you see any possibility that there could be an alliance between them to make sure that that sustainabilities are maintained or considered at least?
That's a great question. I am not fully optimistic because things have been getting worse even since I left the community. I've heard people are being arrested, people are being thrown out for dissent, what's seen as dissent. The community right now is 3,000 people. They're trying to basically, so since the Indian government instated this new secretary, they're trying to implement this plan, which was originally formulated by one of the founders, Mira Alfasa, back in the 60s, to create a city that is available for 50,000 people to live. So it's like this huge, absolute insane shift. And from the Tamil people I was working with and speaking to, there's really this feeling of disempowerment. And there's this, if this kind of feeling of fear of even speaking out about anything that is negative about Auroville. I really only had one on the books participant who would even say what they felt about their oppression in the community. People would hint to it, but they'd be turn off the voice recorder. I don't want this associated with my name. I want this anonymous. So there's this fear even from people who, are Tamil, whose ancestral land Auroville is occupying, that there's just, no real community control in that demographic. And yeah, I mean, in terms of governments within the Auroville, community of foreigners as well, there's also a feeling of disempowerment. They're being shut out of meetings. Their citizens assembly is not being recognized for the power that they have. And basically what I saw happening was, there's this huge influx of money coming into Auroville. It's one of the biggest tourist attractions in South India. I think that the government took interest in it because there's a lot of money there. There's 2,000 tourists a day, something insane like that. And it's basically being developed into this Disneyland of spirituality and external sustainability, material sustainability. So I don't know. I have this strange experience of visiting intentional communities right before they dissolve, which I hope is not the case with this, but I don't know if I see it actually evolving as an intentional community, but more as this Disneyified structure of what they wanted to be, but just, on this very surface level without the deep inner work. Not to be really nihilistic about that, but yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question.
I'm hoping we can end on a positive note. Is anyone familiar with
Claudia, do you have your hand up?
Oh, Claudia, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to mention that I guess even this reminds me of that term stage authenticity, that, and so it's when people come to Auroville, especially as it becomes more and more of a, as you say, a tourist destination, to what degree is some of the presentation that's given towards the tourists, how much is that going to be yeah, in what way is it being presented authentically, I guess, you know, instead of just like having this like very like lovely touristic face, which is, I guess, of benefit towards increasing its visitors and therefore its success. That's it.
Yeah, no, and I mean, the G20 came to the community like when I was there, and you know, there's like this whole legacy of the G20 in India. You know, in Mumbai, they put up curtains around like the, you know, economically disenfranchised communities, like literal curtains to like, you know, not show that part to the dignitaries that were arriving there. So yeah, you know, I got to experience kind of firsthand this, like, you know, putting up of all these posters. Like I wasn't allowed to leave my like community for like 24 hours while these people were here. And yeah, I think that it's not being presented. It's being presented in a way that is like not authentic, and like unless you're in parts of the community that are like very like out there in the middle of the woods, like there are people who are living to the standards and practicing like the real values of the community, but it's becoming more rare. I don't know if that answered your question.
Thank you.
I'm very intrigued by Carolyn's comment in the chat, and I wonder if you'd want to elaborate on that, Carolyn. I don't know if that's a possibility.
I can speak. Yeah, so my name is Carolyn. I actually just moved out of the city for need of like emotional recreation and relaxation after living in downtown West for 7 years and doing some advocacy around community development. But I just kind of felt like I can't remember exactly the topic of conversation some 10 minutes ago, but it was around like, how do we, is it possible and how can it be facilitated, like communication between multiple parties who have different ideas about what's the best way and like what, you know, what does sustainability mean to them? And even with like best intention, I just kind of saw it in real time, this like very patriarchal, which I think is the word that was used before, white supremacist approach of imposing what the group that had the resources believed to be the most effective way of creating development and planning without, you know, true community level involvement. And despite the fact that the developer, I will not name names, has a reputation as a community developer, quote unquote, there wasn't any real opportunity for the community to be involved in the process of planning. And I mean, there's these sort of like check boxes, right, that have been put in place by the planning department, which are, you know, like a series of town halls and things like that. And those boxes were checked off. But I can say as a person who was directly involved and very interested in seeing outcomes that would benefit the community, I personally felt very shut out of conversations. And I even had heard through back channels about things that the developer was saying about me behind my back, you know, and I'm not a perfect person, of course, but my intention the entire time was actually just to help create more transparency. And so, unfortunately, I don't think that I can pose solution to this question about how can we address that problem. But, you know, I will say though that like, I think that the biggest problem though is that those with the resources do think that the only way of creating solution is by imposing their own, because they have not seen cooperation in action. And I do believe that there is a possibility for those people who have the resources and who are quote unquote put in charge to facilitate spaces of cooperation and greater communication, but I just don't think that it's been modeled for them either like in their own industry or, you know, as in society.
So interesting.
Thank you for sharing. I'm so sorry to hear about your experience, but it's helpful to know what's going on. And I think often there's lots of organizations that check off the box that they're doing stakeholder engagement, that they're holding listening sessions, or they've posted surveys online just as a means of saying that they've done the work, but aren't really listening deeply or interested in what people have to say. I'm hoping that some of you out there might have positive emergent models that you've seen where this work is working helpfully to generate consensus about directions that communities want to be involved in. Does anyone have an example of a success story in the community that you might be engaged with?
My community is just beginning a planning process, and I'm a little nervous about it. So ask me next year, I'll tell you how it went. But yeah, we're just starting. We're a small community of 1,300 people, and it'll be interesting to see what transpires. So
I wish I had an success story, but I feel like, you know, direct action is really, you know, a powerful tool and resource for communities to utilize. I think that it's necessary, you know, like, yeah, thank you for what you said, Carolyn. I also share your frustration working for the city. I'm like, oh my God, like there's money talks and, you know, everything falls to the wayside when there's big money in development. But I think that, you know, I've seen strides and small successes across the city and in other communities through direct action. And it just unfortunately takes years and a lot of commitment and a lot of time and a lot of resources that people don't usually have. So I think like investing in, you know, community groups that are really doing the work on the ground and supporting those in any way possible for the long haul, you know, because it's going to be a continuous battle against these developers, can be effective. And I want to say that that's going to be the result, you know, at Cop City or, you know, all of these pipelines that continue to be built. But I think it's going to take a long time, unfortunately.
I don't have a success story, but it just a thought that occurs to me. I do teach a class that explores the work of the Coalition of Immokalee Workers. And what they have arrived at is something they call worker-driven social responsibility. And the basic idea here is that people, you know, at the very kind of cutting edge of capitalism, workers who are exploited, tantamount to modern day slavery, human rights violations, all of that. They were able to create and generate power in basically a power system. I mean, that's what we're talking about, is these systems of power. And you know, money is a form of power, but there's other forms of power. And they were able to first analyze their situation, then find allies to put pressure on the corporations that bought from the farmers who were exploiting them, to put pressure on those farmers to have a code of conduct that was monitorable about it. And I wonder if there's some kind of parallel type thing of could, you know, communities that are affected by unhealthy, unsustainable development, who want to have their voices heard, you know, can use popular education and other tools to generate their age, you know, to rediscover or find their agency, and then find partners, and then engage in these tactics of, ultimately it's kind of about, it's like a moral thing. It's about, you know, what's right, and bring that to bear. And bring it to bear in such a way that, you know, it's like, okay, so a developer wants to, you know, build some property that's going to destroy a community. You know, are there ways to really, you know, make that an unattractive thing for potential tenants? You know, it's like you're buying, what you're getting into is something where you will be, you'll be doing the wrong thing. People want to do the right thing. So brands and their protection of their brands is really important. Anyway, just some thoughts on that. I don't have a great example of how it can work. I do think that there's things, I wrote about this years and years ago about ecological restoration and practices of having things like prairie burnings, that those kinds of things are actually profound moments of an ecological cycle and the possibility of building human experiences in relationship to that, to have that kind of deep education about the relationship with nature in a particular place, and then further the relationship of people to one another.
Yeah, the premise of reciprocal restoration and healing. So much of this is about trauma also. It's not just the loss of a natural resource, but the loss of identity and people's connection to the land.
If I can just add, the Schoharie River Center's environmental study team has had 2 successes, and that's because they were asked to do citizen science on a waterway, did the science, and because they're citizen science, it's not at the highest level of, even though they use all the proper protocols, it's not, it doesn't register as it would be if it was a real scientist. So they've done the work. They sent the data that they had to the DEC, the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, which required them then to follow up. And there's been 2 incidences where the students learn how to foil. They learn how to present their work at the town meeting or whatever. And in 2 cases, they outed a mobile home park that was discharging raw sewage into the Schoharie Creek. And the kids did all the research, and they made them do mitigation for that. And the second one was a leachate that was going into another waterway, the Normanskill, and was, the information came to them through someone who lived on that land and saw the water that was coming through his property. So in those cases, it's very micro, but I think I'm a real fan of citizen action and the fact that you can make a difference at your very local level. Again, they're kids, and they were able to talk to the town board, and they weren't real happy when they came with their slides and their data, but they had to listen. So yeah, so I think, again, not on the macro at any stretch of the imagination, but certainly at the small level, I think citizens can make a difference. But I'm also somewhat of a Pollyanna.
We need more of you. Well, thank you all. We greatly appreciate your taking the time out of your evening to come and meet with us today. We have one more chatFEST in our series on June 14th, and Claudia is actually going to be moderating that as well. Do you want to give a little spiel about what that's going to be about? I know we've got Asayo, another one of our Max graduates, and someone from the Oneida Nation that's going to be part of that.
Absolutely. Well, it's going to be exploring in what ways do art and culture affect policy. From my experience, we have had various, I guess, in terms of cultural placements, I guess, through the festival space, and now other kinds of arts interventions, especially in the mural and different kinds of festivities that happen here. In what way can this actually affect cultural policy, governmental policy? And so this is something I'm really looking forward to. And yeah, I guess I'll see you guys next on the 14th. This is really, really great. Thank you guys for bringing this into my life again. It's wonderful. It's really wonderful to be here in a country and to see what's going on. And then very, for my 2 cents, actually, we have a terrible water crisis, and our watershed is now invaded by a type of a lotus flower that's just invasive and taken over. And so it's interesting to see both sides, whether normally it's the North American or foreign contingent that, is actually, I guess, has the time and resources to sort of like say, hey, this isn't right, what can we do? And so there's citizen organizations about this, but it's also been interesting to note how some of the people that are actually living on the watershed, but maybe they used to farm, maybe they used to, which is actually quite toxic, and maybe they used to fish, and how the conversations that are happening between the community to come together and address governmental policy, actually. So it's actually an overlap between today's conversation and then what's coming up, in what way can some of these peaceful, creative protests actually make policymakers take action quicker, sooner than later, before the water runs out.
The perfect segue from this session into hopefully everyone's able to participate and join then as well. I want to send out a special thank you again to Ellen and Morgan for sharing your work with us. It's really inspirational to see what you're doing and what's taking place in your communities.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Ellen.
Great. Thank you all.
Bye, everyone. See you guys then.